Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land which I work and live, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Pay my respects to elders past and present, and I'd like to extend that respect to traditional custodians of the land where you join us today. So hello and welcome everybody to the launch of the State of the Workplace Burnout 2024 report. Sally and I are very excited about the launch of this year's report and the interest that it's already generated. I think we have people here joining us from across 4 different continents, and we're all really united by this common challenge. We're here to create a better workplace and hopefully try to end burnout for all of us. We're here not to just share the latest data insights today, but hopefully we want to ignite a movement. We're here to say no to the normalization of chronic stress in the workplace. We're here to paint a picture that a better future is possible. A future where work actually empowers and not consume us. Burnout is a really complex issue, and tackling it requires a collective effort. We need individuals, we need organizations, and we need leaders to really come together to share those insights and to work hand in hand to create a sustainable future. We hope that we can spark that movement today. It's all about reframing the narrative on our relationship with work and demanding something better than what we have today, and really holding ourselves and each other accountable for these type of changes. My name is Chan, and I'm the Managing Director of Infinite Potential. I'm also the co-author of this report alongside Sally Clarke. So with Infinite Potential, we are an independent, not-for-profit think tank and consultancy that really believes that our core mission, that if we can build better workplaces, we can build a better world. Imagine all of the positive that comes from people experience, having a positive experience in the workplace and then taking that back out into the world. Stop there. I just want to thank you again for being here. I'll pass it on to Sally to kind of get us started today, and I'll come back a little bit later.
My turn to forget to unmute. Thanks so much, John. Thank you everyone for being with us. My name is Sally Clarke, and I'm a burnout author and expert and co-director at Human Leaders and also co-author of this report. Thank you for getting us kicked off, John. We're all familiar with stress. And put simply, healthy stress is a physical response that we have to a short burst of stimulation, which gives rise to creativity and innovation. And it's designed to ensure the survival and evolution of human species. Healthy stress is always followed by adequate rest and rejuvenation so that we're energized and ready to face the next challenge. That's how our bodies are designed to work. Chronic stress is low level and ongoing. It's difficult to identify, quite insidious, and this means it can sneak up on us quite easily. And today, for many of us, chronic workplace stress is normalized. We view it as an inevitable aspect of our work lives. We talk and share about how draining, consuming, or tiring, overwhelming work is, then continue if there is no alternative. We share memes and we laugh at jokes on the internet about how exhausted we are or how draining work is, and simply assume this is the norm and there's no other option. We're exhausted, cynical, and always busy. And it's just how it is. But chronic workplace stress comes at a huge cost. At individual level, it eats away at our health and it causes a phenomenon known as burnout. I just want to take a moment here also to just offer a reflection for yourself if you are familiar with the experience of chronic workplace stress, and perhaps know someone who's been through a burnout or even have experienced burnout yourself. Just take a moment to reflect. Burnout costs organizations billions in lost productivity and employee turnover. And as John alluded to, it costs our societies immeasurable losses in people's capacity to be good friends, partners, parents, family, and community members, and active and engaged citizens. And this is something I think about a lot. If we think about all of the incremental ways in which people who are impacted by burnout and chronic workplace stress are less than their whole self, and then the cumulative effect that this has on our societies and who we are as a species, it's enormous. But we're stuck in this cycle where chronic workplace stress is the prevailing narrative. Rather than seeing it as a red flag and a sign that something is drastically wrong systemically, we're accepting the unacceptable and burning ourselves and each other out. To break free from this cycle of chronic stress at work, we need to fundamentally rewrite the script on work. We believe we need a collective uprising against the root causes of chronic stress in the workplace. And the great news is we can. We have the power to choose a different path where work fuels us, not consumes us. And today we're going to look at, firstly, a little bit of an introduction to what burnout is. So we're really clear about what we're talking about. Burnout is a term we hear really often. So it's really important that we're very clear about what this term means. We're then going to look at some of the in-depth findings from the State of Workplace Burnout 2024, and there are some juicy ones. And then we're going to shift to sort of reflecting on how we can work towards creating a sustainable workplace and a way of working together that does actually uplift human beings rather than exploit and deplete them. During the session, we're not going to take time, unfortunately, for questions and answers, but we will obviously be open to hearing from you and looking forward to hearing your comments on social media in the coming days. Now, paint a little bit of a picture about what burnout actually is. I wanted to share this photo of me from about 14 years ago. And this photo really encapsulates how I was feeling at the time. It felt incredibly tense. I felt totally overwhelmed. And I also felt completely alone. I was working as a finance lawyer at a large law firm in Europe. And I was working 80-hour weeks with an untenable workload, consumed by work. This went on for months and then years. And to the outside world, it looked like I was a success. And on the inside, I was miserable. I was experiencing an array of stress-related symptoms, headaches, a lot of trouble sleeping, stress rashes. I was really snarky. I started to withdraw from my relationships, including my primary one, which ended up ending, I think, partly due to what I was going through at the time. I felt really isolated and unsupported by the partners that I worked for and the organization at large. But because of the prestige associated with this role, I persisted. And a few months after this photo was taken, I actually collapsed at an airport. I was in the arrivals hall in Nantes in France, and I fell to the ground. I started crying, and I couldn't stop. I was deep in burnout, and yet it took me years after that moment to actually acknowledge that that was what had happened to me because of the stigma and shame that is still associated with burnout, with the experience of burnout. I looked around and saw other people who seemed to be coping fine. I assumed there was something very wrong with me. Now, I was lucky. I was in quite a privileged position, which meant I could leave my role and trained as a yoga and meditation teacher, moved to Morocco, and really felt for one of the first times in my life like I was being my authentic self. And it was great. And for years, I kind of didn't look back on what had happened. And eventually, I did get curious. I started to wonder what I'd been through and why. And I wanted to really unpack that experience so that I could hopefully avoid going through it again myself, but perhaps help others avoid the distress, the shame, and total isolation that I had experienced. I delved into the research, which has been ongoing for decades at this point, and I quickly realized that burnout is not the individual's fault. All of the research really points to the fact that it doesn't matter how intelligent or self-aware you are. If you try to outsmart burnout, it will prove you wrong, which kind of felt liberating to me at the time. It hadn't actually been my fault. And this really lifted a weight off my shoulders, but then of course prompted the question, what does cause burnout? Luckily, around the time that I was doing this research, the World Health Organization, for the first time, defined burnout as a syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. The World Health Organization, based on extensive existing research into burnout, identified these 3 dimensions of burnout. And this is what we use to measure burnout in the infinite potential burnout scale. So it starts with exhaustion, that is feelings of physical, mental, and emotional depletion. Cynicism, that is mental distance, depersonalization, alienation, feelings of negativity towards one's work, and often towards other aspects of life, a kind of withdrawal from the world. And reduced professional efficacy, which means a reduction in the level of productivity, might notice increases in mistakes and feelings of incompetence. And this one can be really tough, particularly for those of us who derive a large proportion of our identity from our work. When we start to screw up in the workplace, it feels scary. A lot of the research really focuses around that we see out there, and a lot of the studies that are done really focus on exhaustion as being sort of the primary measure of burnout. But you really want to highlight here that it's those other 2 dimensions that are also essential. So you can have 2 of the dimensions and not one of the others, and not actually technically be in burnout according to the definition. And there's been a lot of talk about what we can do to end burnout, of course, and how we can solve chronic workplace stress. And often to date, the focus has been on building individual resilience, wellness programs, yoga and meditation, which are obviously not inherently bad, but this is really like fighting a fire with a glass of water, or using an umbrella in a hurricane. An abundance of research, including a recent study by Oxford University, which was published last month, shows that ending burnout, ending chronic workplace stress, is primarily a matter of systemic organizational change. And the good thing, it is achievable. We have a vision for the profound change that's needed to truly end burnout, and we will share it with you shortly. But in order to end burnout, we need to first understand it, and to chart a path towards burnout prevention, we need to know our starting point. And that's exactly what this research does. Over 4 years now, the state of workplace burnout has revealed the truth of chronic workplace stress and burnout globally. It's explored the connections between burnout and other workplace metrics like psychological safety, engagement. This year, psychosocial hazards, loneliness, and the impact of reduced working time on burnout and other metrics. So to unveil exactly what the state of workplace burnout in 2024 is, I will pass back to Dr. John Chan.
Great, thanks so much for giving us that overview about burnout, Sally. So very excited about finally releasing this finding. This report takes about 6 months from just the initial thinking about the type of hypotheses we want to test, and getting all of the study kind of logistics happening, working with partners, and then finally analyzing and putting the report together. And so after 6 months of work, I'm very excited to discuss the findings here. I want to quickly kind of show you in terms of who participated in the study. We had 2008 participants from over 43 different countries participate in the study this year. Throughout the 4 years that we've been running this type of study, we've had over 10,000 participants participate in the study. And what that really does is it allows us to have a very longitudinal view in terms of what is happening, but also really validates on that psychometric side the skills that we use to measure burnout and the other dimensions as well. We've broken down the findings into these 5 key areas, which I'll go over in a little bit more detail coming up. But I do want to say that purely as from a time thing, we won't go over each piece of the details, but I'll just highlight the key findings from each one of these. Once you get into the report, there'll be a lot more findings that you'll find in the report as well. So let's get started. So in the first section here, really is about the state of global workplace burnout. How are we doing? And what we saw as sort of that overall rate is that overall in terms of the global burnout rates, the rates have leveled, seem to have leveled along with last year. So, in the last couple of years, we have seen a steady growth in burnout. But this year, the overall burnout rate is at 38%, which is same as last year. Now, looking a little bit deeper into the different demographics, the one that I do want to point out is the difference in terms of gender. What we see this year is that women are being affected and experiencing burnout at a much higher rate than men, 42% versus 33%. And if you look at that trend, where women has increased their level of burnout by about 4%, men has actually dropped in terms of the level of burnout that they're experiencing. So increase for women by 4%, decrease for men for 3%. And we get a lot of questions asking about why is this happening? And while there is a lot of different possible explanations, one common question that we hear both in the media and also questions that gets asked to us is about caring responsibilities. Does the burden of having caring responsibilities outside of the home, where women picks up the majority of those responsibilities, increases the likelihood of burnout? Since we're a big group, I won't ask you guys to guess. So we found this very consistently in the last 4 years, and this might be quite counterintuitive to what you may think or what you may have seen in other publications. The answer is actually no. Caring responsibilities for the 4th year in a row now, actually, we asked the question on participants if they have caring responsibilities. That can be a child, parents, somebody else that they are responsible for caring. And all 4 years, there was no increase in likelihood for that population than those without caring responsibilities. And for the past couple of years as well, we kind of talked to those individuals in terms of why is that? Because everywhere else we kind of hear and see, we know those with caring responsibilities, they're a lot more exhausted, and all of these things that they're responsible for. But interestingly, and this kind of goes back to the definition that Sally had mentioned, that burnout is comprised of 3 dimensions, not just the exhaustion part. Year over year, yes, those with caring responsibilities are far more exhausted than those without. But interestingly, there's almost a protective factor from the other 2 dimensions of burnout. For example, the cynicism. Those with caring responsibilities balances out sort of what they focus on, and they've got the work, but they also have caring responsibilities, and those that ability to kind of balance out and not become hyper focused on just work, that actually creates a protective barrier. And same with professional efficacy. Those with caring responsibilities are very short on time, and they are probably a little bit better in terms of organizing. Yep, this is the time I need to spend on working, but I've got to leave at 4 o'clock so I can go pick up my child from daycare, or whatever responsibilities they have on that. So that professional efficacy side also becomes a protective barrier from those individuals burning out as well. When we look at the overall well-being and organizational support, similar to those burnout rates, and they kind of stabilized between last year and this year. But again, when we look with that gender lens, the same trend is happening, where the well-being for women is dropping, while men's well-being has increased. And same with the organizational support. Women are feeling less supported in the past 12 months than by their organization, whereas men is feeling more supported by the organization. So as you kind of think about your organization, the type of policies in there and how that works for different genders is something to really kind of consider. Whereas there's really, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, where really there's not one size that fits all for a lot of these type of policies, and it's important to evaluate how that affects different groups. One really interesting finding was we looked at this perception gap between managers and employees when it comes to well-being. Now, this year's research didn't look into the exact reasons for this perception gap, but what we did see was that 68% of people leaders, so managers who have direct report, indicated that their employees were overall well-being was about the same or has improved in the last 12 months. However, 45% of the participants said that their well-being has worsened in the past 12 months. So we're seeing this real gap between the perception from leaders versus the employees. And while again we didn't look into the specific reasons, from our work with clients, we see kind of two possible causes here. The first is we get a lot of aha moments when we run burnout type of training with people leaders. It's that lack of education on what to look out for. For most managers, mental health is not something that they've had to deal with in the past. And it's not something that's not the reason why they became people leaders. So it's really important for organizations to train their managers on what to look out for, what do they do when they spot a problem, and what type of support can you provide both the manager and their people when something were to happen. The other reason I would give or kind of guess is that managers themselves are experiencing, there's a lot of managers out there that are experiencing burnout themselves. And we know that when a person is experiencing burnout, they are in that survival mode. They're just trying to get through the day. They don't have the capacity to look out for themselves, much less other people as well. And so I think for those who are managers who might be experiencing burnout, the easiest thing for them to say is just, yeah, sure, everybody's fine. And that creates, again, that perception gap where it could be a possible reason why more action isn't being done in certain organizations. And one thing to kind of think about, I know most of you who are in larger organizations do engagement surveys, culture surveys, and to ensure to look at that perception gap between some of these issues between managers and employees. That oftentimes gives you a clue about where you might want to kind of prioritize, where there might be a gap in how people are feeling, depending on where they are within the organization. The next area of insight is about, we looked into the impact of reduced working hours. In the last probably 12 to 18 months, there's been a growing momentum and a lot of conversation about the different reduced working hour modalities, such as 4-day work week out in the media and also probably just within organizations. In this year's studies, we wanted to compare the impact of individuals that have moved to this reduced working hour model with more traditional kind of 40-hour work weeks. And we were really fortunate and excited to partner with the team at Work Time Reduction, who have been helping organizations move towards reduced working hours, whether it's a 9-day fortnight, shorter work days, or a 4-day work week, or other type of reduced work hour models. And they help their organizations by improving their processes and making changes to their work processes or practices, to help their business become more efficient. And so thanks to the team at Work Time Reduction, we were able to do a direct comparison between those who have moved to this reduced working hour with all of us who are in the more traditional working models. And as you can see from the graph, there are some really clear advantages for those working less hours and in this sort of new modality. One striking insight is that those working over 40 hours a week, the burnout rate for those working over 40 hours a week is 42%, while it's only 9% for those working on a reduced hour basis. That's a huge difference there between that 42% and 9%. One thing to note is that those organizations that have successfully moved into a reduced hour model often go through a 12 to 18 month kind of transition to really prepare their people as well as their organization to move into this new model. You know, they reviewed their work processes, job designs, culture, management styles, all of those things in order to get ready for this new way of working. And so even if reducing work hours is not the final goal, or maybe that's not how you want, or that's not the way to go, you know, what this shows is that doing a lot of this work on improving organizational hygiene can really create really good positive impacts on the organization. And again, kind of strengthens that definition that burnout is caused by these organizational structures and culture pieces. Moving on to the third main area we looked at, which is about psychosocial risk and hazards. Within Australia, in the past year, a lot of legislation has been passed about the need for organizations to look at psychosocial risk and hazards. And I know this is something European countries have been doing in the past, and other countries are looking at. When we looked at, one common question we get is, you know, when we look at those psychosocial hazards, it is a very long laundry list of things like a list of psychosocial hazards. And you know, a lot of organizations and people who work in this space get a little bit overwhelmed by, oh, there's so much stuff, and it sort of becomes a checklist type of exercise. And through the study, we wanted to kind of see which ones had the most impact when it comes to burnout. And while organizations should definitely take care of all of these psychosocial hazards, as you can see on the list here on the right, if the focus is on reducing burnout, there's three that really jumps out as the big drivers for burnout. The first one, there's job demand, so that those unmanageable workloads and too few resources to work on them. Job control was the second biggest one. You know, the just lack of control over how you do work, when it's done. I think in a lot of situations where there's a lot of changes within in timelines or in the work that you do, that's a really big driver. And finally, workplace relationships. This has been, you know, more and more research is really showing the importance of having really strong workplace relationships within teams and within, you know, the organization itself. When you have that, it really serves as a really strong barrier against burnout. The fourth key point that we looked at was trying to find that sweet spot for work. You know, I think the hybrid conversation has been going on for a few years now, and we've been looking at this also for the last couple of years. What is the answer? We have organizations now that are trying to bring everyone back into the office 5 days a week, while some are still figuring out what a good hybrid work environment kind of looks like. And this is sort of some of the key pieces that we found. Basically, the overall answer is it's complicated, but there is a way to kind of think about this. Of the 38% of people experiencing burnout, 20% of them were working from the office 4+ days a week. And what we saw was the lowest was those working in the hybrid format, 2 to 3 days, or splitting 2 to 3 days between the home and the office. But it's not that simple in saying, oh, working from the office is bad and hybrid is good. If you look at the second chart there, and this actually for well-being, and this actually goes for organizational support as well. Working from home is actually, those working from home actually has the lowest levels of well-being and the lowest levels of organizational support, whereas working from the office 2 to 3 days and working from the office 4+ days showed quite strong levels of well-being and organizational support. So, you know, it's kind of tricky, and it's not just letting people work from home is good. It is not just bringing them back and everything will be hunky-dory, but really just kind of goes at, we need to do a little bit more. Organizations need to do a little bit more work. There are definitely positives in bringing people back into the office, but what do you do when they're in the office? That's important. When people come into the office and spend all day on Teams or Zoom, that's quite counterproductive. Whereas if we redesign how work and how process works, where when somebody comes in the office, they're doing all of the face-to-face, networking, collaboration type of work. That's where you can really find that sweet spot for work. So I think the overall message is, it's more than just looking at how many days you're in the office versus home. It's what you do you're in each location. And finally, this is one piece that I'm really interested in, which is the relationship between burnout and loneliness. We know from a lot of other great research that the rates of loneliness around the world has significantly grown in the past probably 10 years or so, so much so that the the Surgeon General in the US has named this as one of the key priorities for him in trying to, as a problem to prioritize within the US. And when we look at the kind of growth trajectory of loneliness around the world and match that up with the burnout rates around the world, we see a very similar kind of growth trajectory. And we're really interested to see, hey, is there any kind of relationship between these factors? And so in this year's study, we had questions. We used the UCLA loneliness scale to kind of measure loneliness in our participants. And what we found was that 1 in 3 participants are experiencing loneliness, so very similar to that burnout rate. And again, when we looked at it with a gender lens, women are experiencing loneliness a little bit higher than men. And interestingly, if you look at that work location and loneliness, working from home and working in the office both have relatively high levels of rates of loneliness compared to that hybrid work. And I think our theory is that when you are in that hybrid work, you are getting a little bit of the benefits of both sides, where when you're in the office, you can have that collaboration time, you can have those networking experiences. Whereas almost when you're working primarily in the office, it becomes too much and you kind of ignore those things because you're there all the time. I can always talk to this person here because we're all in the same place. Whereas you make an effort when we're all just here a couple of days a week. So when we're together, hey, let's go out and have a coffee or work on some of these collaborative type of work. Now, I know loneliness, for those of you who look after large organizations, like, well, this isn't, that's interesting, but why should we care about that as organizations? And really the reason is because it affects a lot of things that organizations care about. If you look at those 3 pie charts at the donut chart at the bottom there, and basically those who are feeling lonely have been reporting being less productive. They've reported lower quality of work, and they feel less engaged than those who are not experiencing loneliness. And I think one of the most probably interesting links that we found was that those who are experiencing burnout are more than twice as likely to experience loneliness. Okay, I'll just kind of say that again. So when you're experiencing burnout, you are much more likely to experience loneliness as well. However, it doesn't work the other way around. Those who are experiencing loneliness had no difference in how if they experience burnout. So it's sort of a one-way kind of effect where, so again, just for my own sake, to make sure I'm clear, I really want to make this point clear that burnout has a direct effect on the likelihood of somebody experiencing loneliness, but experiencing loneliness doesn't increase your chances of experiencing burnout. Once again, going back to that definition, that burnout is a syndrome created within the work structures, work cultures, and it's not about the individual. And again, this kind of, between the caring responsibilities, between this insight about loneliness, we get more and more proof that it's not about the person. It is about what we're doing in the organization that is burning people out. So that kind of concludes some of the 5 of those key points within the report. Like I mentioned before, there's much more there in the report in terms of more specific findings about each pieces of those, and more deep dives into both the demographics and kind of other areas. As Sally kind of alluded to in the introduction, we are one of the key points, other than kind of showing and getting these wonderful insights about burnout, is about creating and this concept that to create the workplace as a haven. Again, I know that's quite counterintuitive. I don't think people think about the workplace as a haven, because what it kind of undoes. Now, right now, the world is experiencing what the World Economic Forum has termed as a polycrisis. Right, to describe all of the different situations in global risk that's happening. There's a lot of things going on that's completely out of our control. There's political, economical, environmental, and social issues that we as an individual do not have complete control over control. And this lack of control really contributes to this pervasive sense of overwhelmingness and kind of disengagement. And if you look at some of the age type of stats, we know all of these things are affecting our younger workers a lot. And so, we kind of want to pose that question. So what can we control? If there's all of these things going on, what can we control? And where do we have that agency to be able to help each other reduce the source of this chronic stress?
And our answer to that question is the workplace. So as we've seen, the normalization of chronic workplace stress, it's as prevalent as it is dangerous. And despite the abundant evidence of the damage it's causing, right now we're kind of ignoring this inherent unsustainability of how we're working, as well as its exploitative and even corrosive impact on individuals, organizations, and communities. But we believe we have an opportunity, especially senior leaders, to create workplaces that nourish human experience, that give us opportunities to improve our mental health and our overall well-being as a result of being at work, through feeling fulfillment, purpose, and again, up-leveling our well-being rather than undermining it. This is not a utopian dream, it's a strategic imperative. So senior leaders have an enormous scope to determine the nature of the work environment that they create and the kind of experience people have at work. So by fostering an environment where people feel safe, they feel connected, they feel recognized for what they do and who they are, where they experience meaningfulness in what they do. Work can be a facet of life that, again, nourishes and energizes us rather than leaving us frazzled and burnt out. We see work as a place where we can plug in and gain energy rather than it simply being another piece of the polycrisis puzzle. So when we create workplaces where well-being and inclusion are embedded into the fabric of the workforce, the workplace itself, this evolution itself ensures a sustainable, productive, and engaged workforce. And this benefits people, but it also benefits the organization in terms of productivity, quality of work, retention, countless other metrics. And it also benefits society at large. So how can senior leaders start to drive this change? Firstly, we need to acknowledge that everyone has a role to play. This is not a task for HR, people and culture, or just an external party. This is really a collective, proactive collaboration that requires input from all levels, and shared responsibility. One size fits no one. As we've kind of elucidated today, burnout is a complex issue, and all of these components of chronic workplace stress are themselves also quite complex. So there's no magic bullet answer. Also because each organization has a unique culture and structure with its own specific needs and challenges. So success comes from solutions which are organizationally consistent, yet locally tailored. And thirdly, leaders must take ownership. Workplace sustainability stands or falls with senior leaders. Senior leaders need to be visible, vocal advocates, setting the tone, allocating resources, walking the talk, and taking responsibility. There is, I think in this case, there's no such thing as overemphasizing the importance of senior leadership, mindset, and buy-in. And leaders also need to cultivate a really compelling vision. You know, for many organizations, this concept of the change that's required to really create a sustainable workplace, the workplace as a haven, there's some unknowns ahead. And it's in a shift that brings the inherent discomfort of change and uncertainty. So by creating a coherent and compelling vision and building trust, senior leaders really enhance that sense of belief and engagement that they need from the workforce to do things differently. We also need to quantify well-being to inform decision-making. For too long, we've considered well-being just a sort of fluffy buzzword. Well-being is a measurable metric, and monitoring and measuring well-being creates the data needed to inform decisions like any other business imperative. So burnout is a complex problem that cannot be solved by anyone alone. We need to work together. We need a collective solution. Everyone here today and watching at some stage, perhaps later, we all have a role to play. Now, if you've heard the definition of burnout, if you think you're in chronic workplace stress, I encourage you to focus on your own well-being fiercely. We need people to be well and fierce so that we can collectively fight this battle together and create a sustainable and better workplace for us all.
And based on our research, and to kind of help organizations and leaders think about, so what do? I need more specific actions on, how do I go about creating a workplace that's much more sustainable. Based on the research and other research that's been kind of going on for the past couple of decades, we've identified 5 essential elements to creating a sustainable workplace. Now, this isn't some utopian view of organizations, but this is a roadmap for an ongoing journey that I think organizations can go on in order to create a sustainable kind of workplace. With these type of interweaving elements, an organization can kind of build the strong foundations that allow people to flourish. This model is intended to spark organizational dialogue and serve as a catalyst to kind of review some of the existing organizational measures that I think a lot of you use today, engagement surveys, culture surveys, things like that, to make sure that these items are all covered within those kind of areas, because we know these are the structural elements that is required for a sustainable workplace. Now, I know you guys have kind of heard Sally and I kind of mentioned that word sustainability or workplace sustainability quite a lot. And I kind of just want to take a second to kind of explain sort of why we are talking about workplace sustainability. For probably the last couple of decades, I think a big organizational kind of norm was all about engagement, to kind of let's see how engaged we can get our employees and all of the benefit that happens within engagement. And what we're kind of suggesting is that that's been going on for a couple of decades. And what we have been seeing is, while there is a lot of positive benefits for the organization for engagement, for the individual, it's sort of there is positive, but there's also negative sides to that too. We see a lot of over-engagement with individuals with the organization, where they almost sort of lose their sense of self. And you see this a lot in kind of charity sectors, community services sectors, education, where they're serving others. And the result of that is we see people burning out within those type of industries where it's almost like an over-engagement issue rather than an engagement issue. And so we wanted to create a more sustainable workplace. Before we can talk about increasing productivity, before we talk about all of these other improvements, we've got to start with creating a sustainable workplace. A workplace where, at the very least, people come into work and they leave work the same way, or they leave work the same way they came in to work, if not to be a little bit better. And so these elements here will hopefully create that structure for that. Just kind of from lack of time, I won't go into details on each of these 5, but just kind of quickly, staying with the 5R, protection from harm. That's probably the most essential piece here, looking at the psychosocial risk and hazards within each organization and making sure those are not being affected by the employees. The second is that need for human leadership. Leadership has really evolved, and especially even since COVID, we have come to understand that certain leadership traits that were traditionally known as these are good leadership traits, they actually don't hold up very well. There's a new set of modern leadership that's required to lead this new generation of workers and also this new work environment. For example, having leaders understand that leading with authenticity, leading with empathy and humility, those are the type of traits that really makes an impact for their people and the organization. The third piece there is, I kind of mentioned earlier about sort of those structural hygiene things, having a relook at the structures within the organization. I think for most organizations that might have been done decades ago, but it's been quite a while to relook at job design, job structures and processes. And that's another really key component to kind of look at that. Team connection, also another really important. I think we took for granted the last couple of years when most of us was working remotely, and now that everybody has come back, I think there's this assumption that, now that we're in the same place, we'll magically all become really close. But there's actually a lot of work that needs to be done within the teams and also just within each of us. Still remember, when I first brought my team back post-COVID, people have kind of forgotten how to talk to each other for more than an hour at a time. I was so used to these kind of 1 hour Zoom meetings, so we kind of forgot what you actually say to somebody in person for longer than for a whole day, things like that. Really fostering that culture of connection, gratitude, and kind of recognition as well. And finally, the personal growth piece. Now, this is slightly different than the other pieces in that it's a little bit more individually focused. What we found in our research, when we talk about somebody who's experiencing burnout and can we help them, well, job demands and kind of job control is always on the top of the list. It's not as simple as, okay, we'll just take away half of this person's work and they'll magically recover from burnout. One thing they talk about is wanting to continue to grow personally or professionally. That's actually really important and actually becomes a barrier to someone experiencing burnout. And again, it kind of goes back to that definition of burnout is those 3 components. This kind of gets at the other 2 components of cynicism and professional efficacy, that if someone can continue to grow and feel like they are learning, again, that serves as a really big barrier. And organizations really need to make sure they are offering quality training, education, mentoring, whatever their people are looking for to be able to continue to grow. And together, all these 5 elements create those pillars for the workplace to be a sustainable workplace And then from there, as you can already imagine, when you improve each of these 5 pieces, the organization effectiveness, improvement, productivity will all go up. At Infinite Potential, we have developed a diagnostic tool and development program to help guide organizations through this journey. Don't have time to talk about that now, but please reach out if you're interested. So finally, I just want to wrap up and just kind of leave you with this. We mentioned this a couple of times, and I think I'll hammer it one more time, that burnout is not a personal struggle. It's not the fault of the individual. Burnout is a collective failing. It's a symptom of a system that has taken too much from individuals. In today's work culture, we have normalized chronic stress, but we can really choose a different path. No one person is going to be able to change change the systems just through their own willpower. But by standing together, by acknowledging that this isn't what we want, and that collectively we can actually make a difference. At the beginning, we talked about our mission is to make the workplace a haven, a place that prioritizes well-being, connection, and purpose. And we really don't think it's a pipe dream. Some of you might be looking at your organizations like, oh, we've got a long way to go. And we definitely would agree, for some organizations, there's a lot to work on, but it is possible. We want to be here to tell you that it is possible. We have seen organizations that have made that move, but it will demand action. There's going to be headwinds in people moving into that type of model. It's not just going to happen magically, and again, the path won't be easy, but because it really requires a big shift in the mindset in how we work, the way we work, and our relationship with work. So where do we start? Read this report, share it with those around you, and start a conversation. Talk to your peers, and kind of join together and kind of share your own stories with each other, and advocate for what does that look like when we have a good balance between, when we have a good kind of work-life balance. What does that look like to me? What does that look like to you? Where can we kind of work together on that? So don't let those, you're going to get a lot of people who are a little bit resistant to change. Don't fear what they're saying, just educate them and make them into allies. And finally, thanks again for all of your time today. Apologies, I know a couple of you have questions up, but we've just due to the amount of people and timing, I'm happy to answer your questions individually. Just please send us an email. So finally, thanks again for your time today. Really hope this session provided some interesting insights, and it sparked a little bit of momentum to make the changes that we need to really create a better workplace. Thank you.